Okay, if you didn't see the last video, I highly recommend you do. In this part of the tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create a list of your contacts. So let's get started. Alright, I didn't want to bother you with the stuff we already did, so I'll just leave a link on the top right and you can check it out. Now, to the main business. First thing we need to do is create our base structure, and it's going to be very simple. Our main window will be our rectangle, and it will have a few properties. The ID will be main window, color will be transparent, and the radius will be 50. I'll launch our app so we can see it. And as you can see, it's an empty window. Let's do something about it. After my initial properties, I'm going to add a stack view that is going to allow us to change views in an efficient way. As you can see, it's an unknown component. That's because we need to import Qt quick controls. Let's give it an ID. And the stack view should fill the whole width and height of our main window. As for the initial item goes, let's create first our component and then we'll continue here. The first thing we're going to create is the contacts view. So let's create a folder that is going to have all our components related to the contacts view and of course our contacts view QML file. Since we're going to use our contacts view in a stack view, this needs to be a component. The next thing we're going to do is going to create our background for the contacts view. So I'm going to add a new file that is going to be our background. And I'm going to place it in our components folder. In our contact view, we should import it, and here we need to use it. Keep in mind that our live loader doesn't apply to our newly created files, so what we need to do is restart our app when we use newly created files. Okay, great. It's still empty because we're still missing our background image. What I'm going to do is create a rectangle and make it transparent. Inside of it, I'm going to add an image. Now you're probably wondering why use a rectangle and not an item if the image is going to cover all of it. And the answer is so we can use our radius. The radius should be the same as our main window radius. Now it's not finding our main window radius because the background file is still not connected to the main window. What we need to do in the main window is set up our initial item, and that is going to be our contacts view. And as you can see, now it's colored, which means it finds it. The next part is actually using an image. So what we need to do is create a folder where we will store all our media. Inside of it, I'm going to create another folder that is going to be called images. I'm not going to bother you with the process how I created the background image. I'm just going to paste it here and I'm going to call it background. So let's use our background now. Inside of our app, we need to add existing files. It's going to be our background. When you open other files, it will show you your background. Now let's use it. I'm going to give an ID here. And we need to give it a source. I'm going to use a relative tab. And as you can see, it's already showing me file system. I'm going to use the property asynchronous just so it doesn't block our app while loading. And the fill mode will be stretch. It's just setting a behavior for our image if the scaling doesn't fit. Now when I save, we have our background image. But as you can see, it doesn't have the radius, even though I applied it. So what we need to do is apply an opacity mask. And in order to apply an opacity mask, we need to include layers. So first of all, I need to set the layer enabled to true. Now I need to apply the layer effect, which is going to be our opacity mask. As you can see, it's not finding it. It's because, again, we're missing an import. And it's Qt graphical effects. Now back to the opacity mask. We need to use the property mask source, which is going to be a simple item. And it's going to have the width and height of our background. Inside of it, we're going to use a rectangle, just so we can use a radius. And with all the properties included, now we have our rounded background. The next component that we're missing is going to be our header. So let's create a QML file called header. Well, let's right away include it here. Just by looking at the header from the design, it's pretty obvious that we need to use a row layout. But in order to control margins better, I'm going to use an item, and inside of it, I'm going to use a row layout. Now please keep in mind that I already played with the margins a little bit. I don't know them on the top of my head. So what we need to do regarding the anchors is this. Since our header is going to be on the top, we're setting our anchors to the top. Our anchor's bottom will be attached to the contact list, but since we don't have the contact list yet, I'm going to comment it out. On the left and right anchors. Let's set the margins to 14. Now let's create our row layout. Let me just copy paste the anchors and margins so we save a little bit of time. Inside of our contact list, as you can see, the first thing on the left are two texts, one below the other. So let's create a column layout to align them one below the other. Keep in mind this could be also sold with anchors, but this is much simpler in my opinion. Since we don't need anything special from our text, I'm going to use the basic QML text and not use our custom text. In case that somebody wants to translate our app, we're going to use the QSTR function. Now I need to import colors. Since our last video, I modified and added some colors that I'm going to need for this. If you'd like to see all the colors that I added, just pause the video. Now the size of our good morning text will be 12. Text should fill the whole width that it can. Opacity should be around 0.4. Now as the fonts go, firstly I need to import it. As you can see, I added a new font called Poppins. Now for our bottom text, I'm just gonna copy paste this and change the values. Let's say the person that we are is John Doe. We're gonna use the same color. The size will be a little bit different. It's gonna be 16, still gonna fill the width, and the opacity will be 0.8. We don't need the top margin, and the line height will be 0.5. Alright, as you can see, this looks fine, but the final piece missing is our buttons. So I'm gonna import buttons, and next in our row layout, I'm gonna create an icon button. An icon button is basically a button that I created using our component library, and it's just a simple rectangle that uses an icon. Now the height of the button should be the layout height, and the width should be also the same as the height. As for the color goes, we're going to use our custom colors primary. To set a path for our icon, we need to include icons. Okay, I see that I made a few mistakes, so this should be just color, and I haven't defined icon color. So icon color should be plain white. So the reason why our icon is placed like this is because our header doesn't have a defined height, since our anchors at bottom are still not defined. In order to connect our anchors bottom, we need to create a contact list so we can attach it to it. Let's create our contact list. Let's include it here. And here, for now, let's just define height and width and set anchors. Now with our contact list defined, we can go back to our header and attach the bottom anchors to it. And as you can see, now our button is normal. So this is our search button. We need another button, and that is the options button. It's gonna be pretty similar to this button. The only difference being is that we're not using the search icon, but the options icon. And alright, now we have our header. Since we already created the contacts list, that's going to be our next item on the list. First of all, let's create a background for it. We're going to use a simple rectangle. For this color, I'm not going to use our component library because this is a color that I'm going to use once and never again. So I'm just going to copy the hexacode. Set the opacity to 0.5, the radius to 40. Now let's create the small notch. The width should be 10% of the parent width. In this case, the whole window. And for this also, I'm going to use a specific color. We're going to use anchors to center it horizontally and to put it on the top. Now the only thing left is actually our list. So what I'm gonna do is create an item so I can group all our subcomponents easier. And again, in order to save time, I'm just gonna copy paste anchors and margins. As you can see, the first thing that we need is the recent chat text. And I'm gonna use a row layout with one child, just because in the future we're gonna add the icon too. For now, we're just gonna add the text. Let's import layouts. And the width should be the whole width of the parent. Inside of it, let's put the text, recent chat. For the color, we're gonna use plain white. And the size should be 16. As you'll realize, in the whole project, we're using pop-ins. But in order for it to work, of course, I need to include it. Font should be bold, and opacity should be around 75%. Now, in order to show every contact, we need to use a list view. The list view will enable us to use a list the easy way. The spacing should decide how much space there is between delegates, and the clip through property will cut off any overlapping elements. For now, until we create our delegate, I'm just gonna put a rectangle, and for the height and width, I'm gonna do 65 and the full width. Now, if I save, nothing is happening. That's because our model is still empty. If I set our model to be 20, it's gonna show us 20 rectangles. If I list through them, it looks like this. Now, what we actually need is some real data, or in our case, mock data. But for now, anything that has a picture and a name. For that, initially, we're gonna use list models. Later, we're gonna create it in the C++ side, but for now, because we're using pure QML, we're gonna use the list model. And in order to save time, I'm just gonna copy paste again. What our list model has is list elements that have name, image URL, and last message. The last message will only show for now a mocked last message. In the future, we're going to create actual last messages. And if I save, of course, nothing is happening because our delegate is still not created. All right, let's create our delegate. I'm going to call it contact delegate, and right away I'm going to include it here. Okay, our contact delegate will be a rectangle. Color will be transparent. The radius will be 100. In order to get data, we need a way of accessing it. So we're going to store it in our property. Let's call it contact data. We're going to take our contacts list and just get the element by index. As you can see in the example, we have a profile image, a name, and the last message. So in order to create it like this, I'm going to again use layouts. First of all, we need a row layout. The width will not be the full width of the parent. It will be around 90% because I want to keep the margin. The height will be the full height. And let's give it a little spacing. Now the image. I'm going to create a similar way as we did with our background. I'm going to use an opacity mask, and I'm going to use a path to access the image. As I said, the source will be contact data that we have stored here in a variable, and image URL. If you're wondering what the image URL is, it is on our contacts list view, image URL that we defined. full layout height, and the width should be the same as the height. Asynchronous again to prevent blocking our app, and the fill mode will be a little bit different. It's gonna be preserve aspect crop. What this will do, it's going to try to keep it always in full screen. The downside to it is it's going to crop off parts of the image. And just so I don't repeat myself, I'm going to copy paste the opacity mask. I have a problem. The problem is I have defined image paths, but I actually didn't add the images yet. So what I'm going to do is just copy paste the images that I already downloaded. And here, I'm going to just add an existing directory and include all the new images. Let's restart our app. Again, I can't open it because my paths are wrong. And now we have it. But as you can see, our crop is not circular. In order to fix that, we need to change our values for the width and height of our rectangle. So the width will be the minimum of width or height, and the height would be the width. And of course, we need the width and height of our profile image and not the background. And now it's circular. Very nice. I noticed that we have still some errors. It's trying to find an image URL of an object that doesn't exist. And that is because our contact list is not using actually our contacts, but is using a model of 20. If we switch back to contacts, our problem is gone. And now our scroll view goes to the bottom and stops where it needs to stop. Now let's add the name in the last message. The next element in our row layout will be a column layout, and we're going to do a pretty similar thing like we did in our header. We're going to take two text elements, set them in our column layout, and they will do almost everything automatically. I'm just going to copy paste the height, width, and margins, and let's create the text element. Again, I'm going to use the basic text element, and for the name, we're going to use our contact data name. For the color, we're going to use plain white. First, I need to include colors. Pixel size should be 14. It should fill out the whole width as much as it can. Now let's fix the opacity a little bit. Font is of course going to be Poppins, and we need to include it. Of course, it needs to fill out the height also, so that the two texts that we have inside of this component could spread out evenly. And the vertical alignment should be top. Okay, now we have our names. Let's add just our last message, and then we're almost done. I'm gonna copy our text. Instead of the name, we're gonna use last message. We're still gonna use the same color, adjust the size, adjust the opacity. We're still gonna fill the width. And if I save this, it's almost good, but the thing that bothers me is that it's going to the end of the screen. It would be nicer if we had like the three dots that cut the text. For that, we're going to use elite, and we're going to lead it to the right side. Okay, I see that I made a mistake. This should be aligned bottom. Okay, now our text looks much nicer. In order to make this clickable, we need to include mouse area. The mouse area will allow us to register the click signal. But not only the click signal, also the hover state. We will know if an element contains the mouse. For now, the on-click signal will just print out clicked. Now let's test it out. Alright, it works. Now let's use our hover enabled state for something cool. We're going to show a highlight when the element contains the mouse. For that, I'm going to create another rectangle that's going to be on top of our contact delegate component. And I'm going to define height and width. Height will be the full height, and the width should be only full if it contains the mouse. So if our mouse area contains the mouse, it will be the parent's width. Now it should be 0. Let's check it out. Okay, it does something. Let's improve it a little bit. First of all, let's use a better color than this. I'm going to use a gradient for this. The orientation should be horizontal. But it's not registering the orientation because we need keep quick 15. Now, in order to get perfect gradient, I'm going to use 3 gradient stops. What that means is that my gradient is going to have 3 colors at 3 different points. My first gradient stop will be at the position 0. That's the beginning of the component, and it's going to be transparent. My second gradient stop will start around 40% of the width, and it's going to be the highlight color. And my third gradient stop will be around at 80% of the width, and it's going to be transparent. If I save this and try it out, we have this nice highlight effect. But I'm still not fully satisfied with this. The first thing that bothers me is when we're using a PNG like this, it will start at the utmost left. I would like to give it a margin on the left side, so I'm going to use anchors. I want it to start on the left side, but in the middle of the image. So we're going to set the left margin to the profile image at half of the width. Now it's a little bit more to the right, which suits me better. And the last thing would be to use an animation. This is all of a sudden. I would like to have a smooth effect on that. So what we're going to do is smooth out our width change. For that, we're going to use the behavior on width. Inside of that, we're going to put the smooth animation. What this is going to do is just delay our width to the duration that we set it to. And the sweet spot that I experimented with is 450 milliseconds. Now we have this sliding animation, which I think is pretty cool when using gradient with that. Okay, with everything that we did until now, your application should look something like this. In the next tutorial, we'll cover the chat thread, so stay tuned.